Welcome back to Dr. Supercoach YouTube for Pigs Round 8 Captaincy recommendations. Last week was a huge scoring week for a lot of coaches. If you got yourself onto a Gawn, Cherry, Butters, Brayshaw, or my guy Lloyd Meek, you would have been laughing. That was a big week. Speaking of Meek, last week I mentioned that there was a donation to the Cancer Council bet riding on Meek versus Tom De Koning versus Darcy Cameron. Total points round 6 to 9. So I challenged anyone in DRSC Slack that Meek would be the highest scoring ruck outside of Max Gawn for those 4 rounds. The challenge was met by one person saying TDK will be the highest, another saying Darcy Cameron will be the highest. So for those following along at home, Meek's in the lead with 274 points through 2 of those weeks. He's got a 39-point lead on TDK and a 59-point lead on Darcy Cameron. But that's just a little aside. No matter who wins, the Cancer Council is going to be $20 better off, so it's a bit of a win-win. But personally, I hope Meek keeps it up, gives me bragging rights over those other lads. So now, round 7, I VC'd Dawson. Not really because I wanted to, but just because my loophole played really early in the week, and he was my only option kind of in those early games. That didn't work out, but I was super confident in a Tom De Koning captain anyway, so I went with that. He got me a nice 135. And just another flag this week, St Kilda play on the Friday night. So if you are like me and Harry Boyd is your only loop option, just be warned about that. Just have a look regardless. Everyone should just take the time to check when their loopholes play so you don't get caught out. Now this week, there are looking like some big scores on the horizon again, so let's get stuck into it. Number 3, Vice Captain Zach Merritt. So Essendon have had 2 bad weeks. They only just defeated the lowly Eagles, and then they got soundly beaten by the Pies on Anzac Day. Zach hasn't been anywhere near his best in either of these games, with scores of 106 and 89. And that's despite him hovering still around that 70% CBA clip. I mean, we know that is a drop from last year, but still, 70% CBAs is plenty. I'm expecting a fired-up, bounce-back score from the Essendon captain here. This is a very winnable, but also very losable game for Essendon here against North Melbourne. The Kangaroos ended last year and probably started this year as a bit of a restrictive matchup for inside mids, but that's changed over recent games. Over the last 5, they're actually the 5th easiest matchup for players like Merritt, having recently given up scores of 162 to Zach Butters, 171 to George Hewitt, 126 to Matt Rao. Now, having said that, they're the only 3 midfielders to go 120 plus against the Roos in the last 5, so it's probably more likely that those really big scores are skewing the data and a bit more of outliers. But it does emphasise that there are some big points here up for grabs against the Kangaroos at the moment. And look, if the Bombers want to be taken seriously, they need to win these sorts of games. And Merritt's going to need to lead from the front. He's a really proud captain. I expect him to do just that and have a big game this weekend. Number 2, Andrew Brayshaw. This is the guy who is the highest Supercoach scorer in 2025 through the first 7 rounds. An incredible starting pick for those who went there. And if you started him, it was likely that you identified his early run to start the season, and that's probably one of the reasons you did it. Unfortunately, that easy run's over now. Or is it? The Saints are a slightly negative team for inside midfielders over the last 10 games, but if you look at their last 5 games, they're actually the 4th easiest, so they were hard, and now they're becoming easy. And that's because the last few games, which they've lost, they've given up some big scores. So the Saints just gave up 139 to Lachie Neale, 159 to Bond, 125 to Kennedy, 124 to Frazier, and that 153 to Jason Horne-Francis. Those games, apart from the Port one, have coincided with poor performances from the Saints and big losses. So this appears to be an opportunity for Brayshaw, who's in red-hot form, to cash in against a struggling team. Now, there is always a risk of a win-taker tag whenever a gun midfielder plays against the Saints, so he could go to Brayshaw, although teams have been tagging Sarong more so this year. But either way, as a Friday night vice captaincy, I don't really worry about the tag risk, because you've got a backup captaincy if he does get clamped, and if he doesn't, he just gets off the chain, and this could be another VC score from Andy. Then my number 1 vice captain option, Tristan Cherry. Tristan Cherry is back. Or at least that's what the Supercoach community is saying. After starting the year slowly with a hamstring injury, Cherry has put together scores of 144 and 158 in consecutive weeks. The impressive thing for me was that last week's score came on the back of 23 disposals. That's easily his highest tally of the year, and he didn't rely on tackles. He only had 3 tackles, so he still got a 158, mainly from disposals. So the 23 disposals, 10 of which were kicks, indicate he's probably feeling good, and his hamstring is feeling alright, and he's ready to return to the cherry of 2024. He's also gotten his hard ruck run out of the way. We identified that at the start of the year. That's why a lot of people didn't start him. He had a really hard ruck run. These next 2 were going to be tough, but not anymore, just because Essendon were the hardest ruck matchup in 2024. When they run that Draper-Bryan combo, they were actually the hardest matchup. But they're both injured now, so they're not. We only have 1 data point for Goldstein this year. He gave up 125 to Darcy Cameron. Now, one thing to note, Goldstein did beat Cameron in the hit-out battle last week, so that indicates the old dog is still a good tap ruckman, but he also allowed Darcy to have 10 kicks, 6 marks, skip forward, kick a goal. So this is a matchup. This is the grizzled old Jedi against his young Padawan, and I don't really expect Goldie to be able to contain Tristan around the ground here, and I think this could be a big VC score for Cherry. Point of difference, Harry Sheasel. Now, this might seem a bit strange to have a guy with over 60% ownership in the pod category, but this isn't about just ownership. It's also about captaincy selection. No doubt people are going to be looking at Cherry, Gawn, Dacos types as their captain this week, and they might be forgetting about Sheasel. And fair enough, he's only averaging 106 on the season, and he's actually only averaging 93 in games when he plays that forward mid-roll. He certainly is a pod captaincy this week because there's only 5% of coaches currently that have the VC on him at time of recording. So there's only 5% of coaches really looking at him right now. But it's my job to remind owners of a guy in their team that they might be overlooking for a VC. And this is why. Because Harry Sheasel has had 2 games this season in which he spent the majority of time in defence. In those games, he has scores 144 and 135. And despite all Kane Corns' grumbling, the word out of North Melbourne is that they're going to keep him in defence for at least 1 more week. He certainly trained with the defenders throughout the week, so I'm pretty confident this week he plays defence. And a loose Harry Sheasel across the backline is always a high-scoring Supercoach beast against any team, but it could be especially big against Essendon, who are allowing the 3rd most marks in the league this season. And an Essendon team who over the last 5 games are the 3rd easiest matchup for wingers and for attacking defenders. So this is a team that probably suits Harry Sheasel's play style. They're giving up lots of marks. They're conceding to attacking defenders. An Essendon team who plays against North on the Thursday night, under the roof at Marvel. This gives Harry Sheasel owners a perfect VC opportunity in the first game of the round. Look, my pod recommendation sub-ton for the first time this year in round 7. John Newcomb let us down, but I expect the Sheasel to get us back on track with a big one. And then we go to captains. Number 5, Darcy Cameron. Darcy Cameron has had an interesting little ruck run in recent weeks. He went 119 against Brodie Grundy. Then the next week against Brisbane, he was dominating that first quarter against Big O. Then he hit a wall. He only scored 90. But then he bounced back with a 125 last week against Goldstein. Well, the good news here is that he gets a matchup with Geelong, the 4th easiest ruck matchup over the last 10 games. To give Reece Stanley some credit, they have been more restrictive since he's come into the team. They kind of become a bit of a neutral matchup over the last 5 games rather than they were the 2nd easiest matchup when it was SDK. However, as I've talked about many times, none of Stanley, Blitzarves or SDK are really good hit-out ruckmen. They don't win the hit-out in many percent of their ruck contests, all under 40%, so I expect Darcy Cameron to be able to dominate the hit-out battle and boost his score that way. And we know he's in really good form around the ground. He's getting back, taking intercept marks to help his defenders out. He's just playing really well. So there have been 3 premium ruckmen play against Stanley since he came into the team a month ago. They've netted themselves scores of 122, 113 and 135 for a nice neat average of 123. So that's probably what I expect DCAM to do in this one. He always has the ability to pop a ceiling score on occasions. I'm not sure it'll be a ceiling one in this one, but I do see a super safe 120 captaincy rather than a high upside VC. Now, number 4 captaincy, Jai Newcomb. I'm back. Jai let me down last week. I recommend him as a pod C against the Eagles, and he did not take advantage. I did hear on a podcast this week that the Eagles have been using Jack Hutchinson to play a bit of an accountable run with role over the last 2 weeks, but I didn't watch this game to see if he went to Newcombe or not. It might have just been a bit of a down game for Jai, I don't know. Regardless, I do expect a big bounce back from him this week against the Tigers, who are the second easiest matchup for inside mids over the last 10 games, and the Tigers have actually become the easiest midfield matchup over the last 5 games. In recent weeks, we can see Petrarca's 129, Rouse 130, Brayshaw's 155, McCluggage's 156, and dual 130s from Neil and Ashcroft. Now, I know that Newcombe's owner's confidence may be shaken from his poor showing last week, but I'm expecting a huge bounce back this week and a repaying of the faith against Richmond on Sunday Arvo. Now, number 3, Lachie Neale. I was debating which Brisbane player I recommend here, as I expect all of Neale, Dunkley, McCluggage and Zorko to score well. In the end, I went with Neale, as over the last 5 games, the Suns have become the third easiest matchup for inside midfielders, behind only the Tigers and the Eagles. They've actually become kind of neutral for defenders, not really that easy, after starting the season very, very leaky. So maybe they've tightened up a little bit to defenders. Now, there is always the risk of a Touk Miller tag going to someone in this game. In the past, the Q Clash used to be awesome, the Touk Miller versus Dane Zorko battles. But with Touk playing more forward than midfield, does he go back to Zorko and resume that battle rather than going to Neale in the midfield? Truthfully, I have no idea. I don't know who Touk's going to go to. If he goes to anyone, he might not. Gold Coast just might not tag. But what we do know is that when Neale doesn't get a tag, he goes bonkers. Scores of 133, 130, 113 and 139 essentially in his non-tag games this year. That could be on the cards again if he runs freely on Sunday. If you own any of the other Brisbane boys, I think you could be fairly comfortable captaining any of them, to be honest. But Neale is the one I have the most faith in, hence why he's the one here that makes my video. Then number 2, here he is again, 3rd week in a row, the Lord and Saviour, Lloyd Meek. A 2-round average of 137, and now a matchup with the second easiest ruck in the league. This is a man in form against a very easy opponent. Every single ruckman that's played Toby Nankervis this year has turned up. That includes a 148 from TDK, a 100 from Sweet, a 117 from Marshall, a 114 from Big O, a 113 from Witts, and last week, that monster 174 from Max Gawn. So that averages out to be everyone that plays Nank has been getting on average a 23% boost to their current form when they play Nank. If Meek gets a 23% boost to his current form, you're looking at a 137 here. And remember, Meek is coming off a career-high 161 last week. This man has a ceiling in him that most don't possess. He won't be highly owned, but if you are in those 8% of coaches that do own Lloyd Meek, let him reward you with a big captaincy score once again. Unless you own Max Gawn, my number 1 captaincy option. I just talked about how Lloyd Meek scored a career-high 161 against the Eagles last week. Well, look out, because the hottest ruckman in the game now gets a matchup with those same Eagles. Max Gawn has a 3-round average of 145, and I think he could smash that number out of the water this weekend against the easiest ruck matchup in the league. Now, we know Bailey Williams is a very easy ruck matchup, but it appears Matt Flynn might be as well. In his 3 games, he's given up scores of 144, 105, that was in only 69% time on ground before Draper got injured, and then a 161 last week. That's a 137 average from ruckman against Flynn this season, and none of them have been from players of Gawn's calibre. He looked great last week. He's now getting around the ground for a season-high 9 marks last week, after 7 the week before. He also added 28 and 25 disposals over his last 2 games. That's a really high uptick from what he was doing at the start of the year, so I do think prime Max Gawn is back, and he's taking advantage of this easy run of his, and this week he gets the easiest matchup of them all. This one is danger territory for non-owners, and one of the easiest captaincy decisions of the year for owners. Just lock this one away and enjoy it. So they're my favourite 9 SuperCoach captain options this week, but as always, here's a bunch of names that didn't quite make the cut. I think these guys are going to have good weeks. I think you could roll with them, especially for your draft leagues. Bont, Butters and Dacos are all good options. They didn't make my video because they all have really tough matchups, actually. Bont and Butters playing each other, the Bulldogs and Port are actually both restrictive to mids this year. So maybe we see a bit of a down game for them. Dacos, Geelong are interesting because they can give up scores, but also if he cops a tag from Tom Atkins or someone like that, it could be lower. Look, if you own any of those three, I think that's still a really good VC option, even for Classic, but just given their tough matchups, I didn't want to recommend them. Then Rowan Marshall has a really nice matchup if he is back. He scored really well on the weekend. If he keeps that up, that's good. Nasiah and Jack Sinclair also have really good matchups if they're playing defence. There has been a lot of talk that they're going to move to a forward or a mid role this week, so just keep an eye on them. Maybe more VCs for your draft. But if they're playing defence, it's awesome. In the same vein, Bradley Hill. The talk is that with those two moving up the ground, Bradley Hill's going to move into defence. He's just coming off a ton. He now has a great matchup against Freo for defenders. So if you can get Bradley Hill up off waiver wires in your draft league, I actually think you could captain him straight away. Then we got Jordan Clark in the same game. I think he should score well against St Kilda. Clary and Petrarca against West Coast in the midfield. Not sure how confident I am in them in Classic, but for draft, absolutely give it a go. Jake Bowie, absolutely flying under the radar, could actually be a premium defender this year. The way he's playing, the way Melbourne are moving the ball around and giving him plenty of opportunity. Match up with West Coast, great option. Then there's the Collingwood boys, Josh Dacos and Dan Houston off half-back. They've got a really nice matchup for half-back, so I think you go for them. Max Holmes as well, hoping he bounces back. He's got a really good matchup for wingmen and attacking defenders. Then James Worpel, again, a good option against Richmond, just like Newcombe. And then as I discussed, the Brisbane boys that aren't Lachie Neale, so you could look at McCluggage, you could look at Dunkley, you could look at Zorko. I think they're all good options. And actually in that same game, the two running halfbacks for Gold Coast, Rioli and Noble, they have really positive matchup for running halfbacks, but it seems to be only one of them scores well one week and then the other scores well the other week, and when one scores well, the other one scores poorly, so I don't really know how you choose which one, but if you own one of them, they're not a bad shout. So there you go. That's my round 8 captaincy recommendations. I'm trading in Tristan Cherry this week, and he will get the VC armband on debut for me. I expect a big score from him, and I don't anticipate that I'm going to need a captain. But if I do, I'm probably comfortable falling back on a Dane Zorko or a Christian Petrarca type, just given their matchups. I don't think they're going to be massive scorers, but they should be like a safe 115 to 125. So I'll fall back on one of them, but I'm not expecting to need it with Cherry. Thanks for sticking through me with that video. You know, I've been sick the last couple of weeks. Turns out I actually have pneumonia, so I'm on the antibiotics trying to battle that. So if I'm a bit congested, a bit coughy, sorry about that, but SuperCoach waits for no one, pushing through, getting you this video, getting you your captain recommendations while sick. But, you know, give me some love in the comments. Tell me if you're loving it or not, or any improvements you'd like. But as always, thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe. Turn your notifications on so you don't miss this video weekly, and good luck.